Welcome, my friends. Telos has been in the game for over 5 years by this point. In fact, we have just passed the 5-year anniversary of his release. Despite that, however, he is still by far the best money in the game that eclipses every single other boss and even every other method in the game, except for merchant of course. But what makes Telos especially lucrative is that he drops best in slot 292 weapons with incredibly powerful special attacks, except for one of them, that will help future-proof the weapons even after higher tiers come out. He drops them in pieces. You can get dormant weapons which are tradable, and then you can attach 3 untradable orbs from him to complete the weapon. And he drops an ability codex called Reprisal that tracks all damage you take and retaliates with the amount of damage taken as damage. So taking a 5k hit would make Reprisal to a 5k, etc. Spoilers, it's not that great. But it's not enough that he drops these items. He also has a very unique loot and difficulty system where you can streak kills before claiming loot, and the loot progressively gets better and rares become more common. But as you streak kills, the enrage, or difficulty, will go up as well. You can streak up to a maximum of 200 kills before you're forced to claim, which is why 200 kill streak is a milestone people go for. And the more kills you streak, the more commons can drop in 1 kill. To this day, less than 60 people have verifiably done even one 200 kill streak, so it's not an easy thing to do in the first place. In comparison, there are over 500 verified gold wardens, or those who manage to kill Telos at 4000% enrage, the hardest difficulty you can kill Telos at. 200 kill streaks require near perfect consistency and skill, and let's face it, luck with disconnects and power outages, so these streaks are a big turnoff. On the flip side, if you can pull it off, you can make big amounts of money. But most people looking to make the big bucks at Telos don't streak at all. Instead, there's an alternative where you can just camp high in rage and only do 1 kill and then claim. This has drawbacks in that the commons won't be terribly great, but the drop rate on rares is still very high and will get you a ton of money as well. Not to mention, this is a lot more DC or mistake friendly, as losing kills won't matter as much as losing a kill that just ruins a streak. So if you see someone make money at Telos, chances are they are doing claims. The best claims are at 24.49% enrage. It is theorized that this is the point where drop rates cap after players took specific data points Aegis gave us and worked out a formula that made sense for those sets of data. While the former implies you get massive drops at 4000% at 1 out of 9 rates, going higher than 24.49 has not proven itself in terms of drop rates, which is a 1 out of 15 drop rate. We have drop logs from both 24.49% and 4000% to support this theory, so that's why we use 24.49% as our claim in rage. Assuming 15 kills per hour with ranged, using the PVME Discord's boss revenue data, these claims are worth 241 mil per hour. If we downgrade it to melee or magic, which assumes 12, that's 193 mil per hour. Although it is possible to get 13 kills per hour, which would be 211 mil per hour. And while it's also possible to get 16 kills per hour with range, that's very difficult to do consistently across multiple hours, so that's kept to 15 kills per hour in practice. Regardless, that's quite a lot of money already, so a method B potentially better than that would be incredibly exciting and what we will find out very soon. But no matter if you do claims or streaks, Telos is by far the best money in the game outside of merging. As we said earlier, nothing else even comes close. The next best boss for money is actually Solak, which may come as a surprise for people considering that Solak has a lot of memes about negative GP. However, with the prices of its rares just shooting up, it really bumps up Solak's GP per hour to be really good at like over 100 mil an hour, assuming 9 dual kills per hour. The next best stuff is things like Elite Dungeons, next Angel of Death, and Raksha, which are still nowhere near Telos at all. It's clearly not even a contest in any way. So we set the stage for Telos claims at a baseline of 15 kills per hour, earning 241 mil per hour. Can 200 kill streaks starting at 0% beat that? Well, let's go find out. Welcome to my review of 200 kill streaks starting at 0%. To finish a 200 kill streak, you need at least 13 hours from start to finish. If playing at around 4 to 5 hours a day, that means ideally I can finish a streak every 3 days with a maximum of 10 streaks in a month. But since that would be incredibly unrealistic going for a full month of Telos with absolutely 0 deaths or failures, I will be aiming for 7 to 9 streaks this month, giving me a little bit of a buffer for failure. This means we have roughly 130 hours this month, give or take, to make money. The setup I went with for 200 kill streaks used both ranged and melee. Ranged from the start of the streak up to around 1500% in rage, then melee the rest for safety. On the other hand, the setup for 50 kills per hour doing claims requires range the entire way, which has the riskiest style when going for fast kills. This is the only way you're able to get 15 or more kills per hour, as if you use melee or magic, you are stuck at 13. With that risk, it's not unheard of to still die mid-claims, although of course, as we established, losing kills doing claims is nowhere near as punishing as dying on a streak. But because I currently don't trust myself using range for the entire streak, taking the kill per hour loss by swapping to melee is worth it to me for this month's experiment. Earlier this year, I attempted to get my first 200 kill streak with ranged only, and I very distinctly remember making mistakes above 1500% and dying for it much more easily than making mistakes below that. While I like to think I've gotten much better since then, I was still wary of going higher with range for the month, so after 1500%, I will switch to melee. If you watched my 200 kill streak from 4000% start video, you may have heard that melee is the safest style at Telos. It absolutely still holds true, and for a crash course, this is because of much safer rotations and strategies on the whole, and Trim Master coming in clutch. Don't ask me how I lived, I'm just a god, and that's all you need to know. Let's elaborate on those 13 hours, however. For the first big chunk, I spent 8 of those hours using ranged. Kills per hour is quite high, as from 0 to 99% in rage, Telos doesn't have P5. The first hour can go through kills incredibly quickly. That in rage bracket can be finished in just like 13 minutes even. In total, that first hour can just barely give like 19 kills per hour. As we'll see, however, it doesn't really lower that much even once we approach the end of ranged hours. From then on until 1000% in rage, we can get 17 kills per hour at absolute max. Afterwards, going complete speed is a bit dangerous, so we want to slow it on ever so slightly, so we just barely miss 17 kills per hour and have to lower it to 16 kills per hour. But once we hit 1500%, that's the end of the line for ranged. Melee from the 1500% region to the end is the way to go, and melee caps out at 13 kills per hour there. The early streaks would sometimes take an extra half an hour or so, because I would reset ore earlier than I need to, but by the end, they all cleanly lined up for 13-hour long streaks. Let's cut to the chase and jump straight into the total amount of loot. This is what my tab looked like at the end. And yeah, if we use the wealth evaluator, that's a ton of money. But GE prices are not representative of how much I'll actually sell for, and I'm very impatient when it comes to buying or selling things. Anyways, after selling off everything, we have a total of around 30.8 billion gross revenue. Of that, 11.1 bill is in the commons alone, and the rest of them are in the rare drops at 19.7 bill. Looking into the rares, I've obtained a total of 57 orbs, 6 dormant Zeros God Swords, 6 dormant Saren God Bows, 6 reprisal ability codices, and a whopping 9 dormant stabs of Sliske. One thing that was incredibly fortunate this month was that I managed to get just enough orbs to use them all with no extras. So I was able to turn almost all my dormants into full weapons except for 2 dormant stabs, which are sold by themselves. But if you want to look at all of them individually, the God Swords were at 943 mil each, God Bows at 1.48 bill each, stabs at 694 million each, codices at 29 million each, dormant stabs at 76 million each. Judging from the dormant and completed stabs, we can very roughly state that each orb is worth around 206 mil, and using that number, dormant God Swords are 325 mil, and dormant God Bows are 862 mil. Keep in mind that these aren't entirely accurate, as certain dormants are better profit to make over others, but seeing as I don't have any leftover God Swords or God Bows, I'm comfortable with using these statistics for the sake of simplicity. You may notice I didn't sell off one Saren God Bow here. That's because I was actually going to use a 3rd age die on it to keepsake, just for looks. Don't worry, this is still good because bullet pipe overrides are not best of slot everywhere, especially at Telos. That explanation will be for another day, however. Going off my other sales on my God Bows, they're all similar enough to where it wouldn't make a huge difference either way if I sold it then or kept it later. Now with the rares out of the way, let's show off the other part of the streaks, the commons. 11.1 bill in total for the month is honestly really good for just being commons. That's 36% of the money alone. This is a little bit straightforward to deal with, however. In general, almost all the loot is pretty stable and can sell for -5% or even -20% pretty quickly. There are exceptions, however, if you're planning to do something like dumping a lot of dragon ammunition parts en masse. So be prepared to either wait a very long time, or if you dump them instantly, it will be for incredibly low prices. the incomplete dragon ammunition, some of the dragon hide, crystal keys, and energies were especially difficult to sell at market price, but I don't think that really made up more than a couple 100 million lost. Still though, any loss is a little bit of a shame. But even with incredibly impatient sales that likely lost some money, 31 bill is still a lot. But we need to address the elephant in the room: supply and degradation costs. We are using best in slot everything to the max, and with that comes some crazy high supply costs that eats into a ton of money. We'll go over the supplies used over the month and calculate just how much money is burned making profit. At the time of writing this, prices will have shifted quite a bit since then, but either way, it should be accurate enough. Let's look at ranged first. Ranged has a lot of supplies with pretty nasty supply costs and ends up as more expensive to use over my melee setup. Let's start with the main gear and ammunition. Hydrix criminal bolts are incredibly powerful bolts that have a chance of giving you instant 10% adrenaline, and all basics will give 1% extra adrenaline per basic for the next 15 seconds. Thing is, this could be infinitely refreshed as many times as possible as long as you get procs, and abilities like Grid or Ricochet and Rapid Fire can absolutely pump you full of adrenaline at a whim. The market has caught on, however, which is why each bolt costs a whopping 45k per bolt, which is absolutely ludicrous, but for the power, it's incredibly worth it to use because they make rotations just that much more consistent and easier. Over the month, I've used above 22k bolts, which is worth an absolutely ridiculous 1 billion just evaporating before my very eyes. Still though, that's absolutely worth it in my book. Even though this is the most expensive supply out of everything, there are other things that cost less to use but I consider far less impactful, so this is actually not really like the worst thing ever. Next up are 20 blackstone arrows with a bow. You may look at this preset and wonder why I have both an Eldritch crossbow and a physical Saren God bow, especially because I also have an SS finality with an SGB spec. I'll explain the EOF later, but the reason is solely because of blackstone arrows. When you use them on an enemy, you can drain their armor and will last for over 12 minutes. This works on everything, even bosses where they normally quickly regenerate defense levels like Rago or Nex, and they allow you to have 100% accuracy at Telos with this setup hassle-free and at a relatively cheap cost as well. Both of the melee and magic meta setups require that you use Steadiest Warhammer to get 100% accuracy across the fight, but range gets a relative equivalent with just blackstone arrows, and since P1 is a time-gated phase where you can't exactly go faster due to a special attacks lined up in the best possible way, well at least above 150% in a rage, applying those 20 blackstone arrows is super easy. Every range kill will require 20 of these arrows, although you can actually skimp out a little bit and only apply at least like 16 or 17. So it's not always a clean 20 arrows used every kill, adding up to almost 29k arrows consumed for the entire month. But they are nowhere near as bad as Hydrix bolts at a rough 55 mil, while arguably even more important for the entire setup. The rest of the ranged weapons are a bit interesting, aside from the usuals like the Eldritch crossbow, Blightbounds, etc. Mechanized Chinchompas are used for AoE, and Bolas are used for binding golems on P4. Thing is, they don't get consumed on abilities at all, so all of them used are literally just accidental auto attacks. Across this entire month, I've only thrown 91 Chins and 13 Bolas with auto attack, which is basically nothing, but they are still essential tools of getting kills. The costs are quite minuscule since I didn't even spend more than 1 mil on the ones I actually ended up throwing between the two, but it's still worth including for completion's sake, you know? Aside from that, the last of the ranged gear has upkeep costs that are my augmented weapons, which all share the same charge pack as my melee setup, and the other degradables and stuff like that. I'll include both melee and range in here for now. On the whole, I've used 346 charges, which adds up to around 18 mil. Not really much to say about the charges, but it's worth mentioning that these are literally just from the weapons, as the armor doesn't abide by divine charges. Speaking of, Elite Serenic is the most expensive T92 armor set to upkeep at roughly 870k per percent of charge for a minimal boost over normal Serenic. That's a fair bit higher than both Trim Masterwork and Elite Tectonic, when those are cheaper than their next best armors. You can repair them with repair kits, but I won't be looking too heavily into those prices. That 870k value came from checking out how much a full recharge of a full set costs and dividing that by 100. Over the course of the month, I've used 137% charge of Elite Serenic. So on the whole, I've used an equivalent of close to 120 mil just on Elite Serenic, which is obscene in its own way. As said earlier, Hydrix bolts may be ungodly expensive, but at least they actually have the power to back it up. Elite Ceramic ain't it, and I would not upgrade Elite Ceramic unless you really don't care about drastically higher upkeep costs for little benefit. All of the essences of finality also have some pretty high costs too, but they are also absolutely worth using solely because of how powerful they are, being able to store special attack inside them to enhance their power, especially SGB. Melee have 2 other ones to be used, but since they're all the same amulet but different colors with different specs, I will once again simply count all of them as one amulet to calculate the total amount of charges used. In total, I've used 201.3% charge, which is just barely over 2 full charges worth. Just like Elite Ceramic, this requires another item to recharge an alchemical Hydrix dust, but I won't entirely lose that value either, just like Elite Ceramic. One dust recharges 50%, and 1% of charge costs roughly 297k. So in total, I spent around 60 mil EO of charges. Again, this is incredibly worth it though, just like Black Sentinels and such, because EOFs are just incredibly powerful. Enhanced fleeting boots are crazy good, or at least fleeting boots in general are. Enhancing it only barely increases the stats by negligible amounts, but there's more to fleeting boosts than what most people may know. Everyone knows that it lets you move while using rapid fire, the tooltip even says so as clear as day, but a hidden function the game doesn't tell you is that you can get a flat 10% hit chance increase when using rapid fire, and that helps immensely for building blacks and arrow stacks at bosses. The degradation cost is very cheap as well, like 4k per percent, another drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the cost. And on that note, Snurrbane gloves are even cheaper at 1.5k per percent, but I also use these across every kill for their incredible poison damage buff, so they degrade a lot more than fleeting boots in terms of actual use. Still though, in total with very rough estimates, it cost me around 860k for the fleeting boots and around 480k for the Snurrbane gloves. Pretty cheap. In the pocket slot, we have the Superior Scrimshaw of Cruelty, which simply buffs all range damage by 6.66%. Pretty simple and to the point. There's 2 variants here. Normal Scrimshaws are tradable but weaker and last shorter, and Superior Scrimshaws are untradable but stronger and last longer. We'll be using the prices of normal Scrimshaws here, considering both normal and Superior Scrimshaws require the same amount of resources to create. Every Scrimshaw is worth around 6.4 mil, and I used 21 of them for a total of 134 million spent. I also made sure to check the initial charge on my first Scrimshaw, and I came incredibly close to cleanly using 21 Scrimshaws without partly using too much, so there will be no partial calculations here. But still, these Scrimshaws are kind of pricey, and they kind of toe the line between worth it and not worth it, but on the whole, I would still take them because 6.66% damage is still very, very good. But that's all of their range exclusive stuff. Now let's go tackle the stuff both ranged and melee use. The food is pretty interesting. Aside from the Selfish Soup and Ceridoma Brews, which are the main expensive food people are used to, there's also the Primal Feast and portions. Primal Feasts are basically packaged food that can click, and it splits into 4 separate primal portions that heal for 2.5k LP per, for a total of 10k LP healed and 1 inventory slot. That's an absolute ton. For reference, Super Ceridoma Brews heal 7.8k LP in 1 inventory slot. Needless to say, if you need food and you're on a tight inventory, this is the food for you, and it's amazing to use at Telos. But they're quite expensive. I've used a total of 502 feasts across the month, and at roughly 230k per, that's around 115 million in feasts. But because our inventory is so limited, I'm willing to pay that much as well. The portions are interesting to calculate because at the start of streaks, I had taken leftover portions from previous kills before the month started. I started with 764 portions and ended the month with 299. I most likely used around 465 extra portions. Assuming each portion is a quarter of the feast, that's an extra 26 million spent on these portions. So the total for the primal foods is a total of 142 million. But that's alright. Again, because our inventory space is so limited with range and kind of melee to a degree, these primal feasts are absolutely worth using. And let's not forget about the Selfish Soup and Super Ceridoma Brews either. Each soup is worth around 25k and brew 282k. I've used around 1.7k soups, which ends up at around 42 million, and I've used close to 800 brews, which ends up at 223 million. Much like Hydrix Bowls and Primal Feast, however, these are absolutely worth the cost used for Telos, doubly so for streaking, because one death kills so much more profit than any other situation, so you really want the best food to keep yourself alive. But even if you're doing 24.9% claims, the extra healing from these foods is very noticeable in terms of both keeping yourself alive and minimizing DPS loss from eating. And at the highest end of PvM with limited inventory space, you absolutely want to have the most healing per slot possible in order to keep those fast kills going. Moving on, there's the Overload and Adrenaline renewals, which are also kind of obvious. Although Overloads are actually kind of expensive these days, which did surprise me. Making a full Elder Overload salve costs around 330k, which I really did not expect before making this video. I basically bought a ton of Overload supplies years ago, and I still haven't finished them all, so it was a rude awakening to finally catch up to today's prices. I used 169 flasks in total with an extra half a flask used, but for simplicity's sake, we'll ignore that. In total, this is worth close to 56 mil, which is still quite a bargain. Keep in mind, I'm also ignoring the creation process that can take advantage of stuff like the Scroll Cleansing, Factory Outfit, Modified Botanist Mask, and Portable Wells. So the actual cost of these overloads are way lower, but regardless, 56 mil at the high end is still a fair price. Adrenaline renewals are also quite expensive, 92k per 4-dose vial. They're absolutely worth using as well over normal adrenaline potions or even super adrenaline potions for the fight, so I use them here. But downgrading is still an option if you don't care that much about saving a couple of seconds across kills. Using renewals opens up a lot more rotation that otherwise won't be consistent, so it's worth the price hike for me, however. Once again, I'm ignoring the extra boosting you get from wells and outfits, but again, it still doesn't change how worth these are. I use 731 vials, with a bit of a partly used vial, but again, we'll ignore that. In total, adrenaline renewals cost me out 67 million. Spiritual prayers are here to juice my Ripper Demon I will be summoning for the fight, and chugging them down to make sure my Ripper always specs is also incredibly powerful. Ripper auto attacks alone are at 15k DPM, and lightly letting the Ripper spec is around 30k or so. Then on the top end, if you are absolutely diligent with every attack as a special attack, Rippers can do 60k DPM max. It is absolutely your best interest to make sure your Ripper is specking, and chugging spirituals to make sure this bar is high is a very underrated part of maintaining top DPS. It is at a massive cost, however, as you use a ton of spirituals when you chug. In total, I've used close to 5,000 flasks. Each flask costs around 43k. Add that up, and it's 213 million used in spirituals alone. It's still worth it as spamming these Ripper specs certainly adds up a ton for DPS and helps ensure those fast times for optimal kills per hour. Still though, it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow. Speaking of Ripper Demons, let's really show them off. The pouches themselves aren't too bad. At 70k per pouch, I used 133 for a total of 9.3 million spent. Not too bad, but the scrolls are a different story. To fuel those specs, I used almost 55k scrolls, and each scroll is worth around 3.1k for whopping 173 million in total spent. For the DPS bonus, it's still worth it, but it definitely does come at a hefty cost, especially if you combine that with spiritual prayers. The rune pouches have runes for Disruption Shield and Vengeance. These spells are incredibly good as well. Disruption Shield can completely block one single attack, and you can use it whenever you want, allowing for safety against Telos' attacks, especially under ECB spec. Vengeance isn't particularly strong as you start off the streak, but as you climb higher and higher, you can get some very nice Vengeance hits. At the time of this month, Sea of Sentinels came out in the middle of it with some incredibly strong spells as well, especially Smoke Cloud. However, I elected to not really use them as I didn't really want to add any more rune costs to the sheet, and I didn't really want to get used to them in the middle of streaks, and I'm glad they did. Aside from that, I also have runes for Entangle within Borrowed Power, which you can unlock from Limited Farm. How Borrowed Power works is that you can store a spell out of a predetermined list and be able to cast it on Lunars 1,000 times before I have to charge it again. It costs just enough runes to cast 1,000 of them, and 18k Limited Farm points to set it, and every cast from them just requires 3 extra Astral runes. So you can set it to Entangle, which I did here because my strategy required it, or you can set it to Smoke Cloud instead for max DPS just on Lunars, which I didn't do, but the option is there. The runes I needed were Body, Blood, and Astral for Disruption Shield and Borrowed Power, and Death, Earth, and Astral for Vengeance. I used around 36k body runes at 23 GP per, almost 11k blood runes at 536 GP per, almost 49k astral runes at 379 GP per, a whopping 90k earth runes at 18 GP per, and around 18 death runes at 294 GP per. Adding in Borrowed Power Entangle, I used another 1,782 nature runes at 265 GP per. In total, these runes all cost me around 32 million. As another fun fact, I used Disruption Shield a grand total of 3,582 times, Vengeance 9,048 times, and Borrowed Power Entangle 594. So yeah, I spam these a lot because they're just really good to use, so use them. Power Bursts of Vitality are extremely good as effectively it doubles your current and max health for 6 seconds, then halves their health after it wears off. In simple terms, it effectively means you take 50% less damage, but your healing is also 50% as effective. So ideally, you may want to avoid eating food in the middle of your power burst, but there are places where you eat inside it anyways, so it's not that big of a deal in this case. But not only are they very good, they are also incredibly dirt cheap. One 4-dose vial costs only 1k-ish, and I used 318 vials across the month for only 325k. For how good these are easily, by far, the best bang for buck in terms of supplies. Nothing else even comes close. Weapon poison is also crazy good. For one, I can simply take a 1-dose vial and immediately free up space to use my 2H weapons, so to effectively take it up no space at all. Poison is also incredibly powerful and contributes to a ton of free damage, especially with Centerbane Gloves. They are so good. Centerbanes are just undoubtedly best assault everywhere you can poison without question. One quote-unquote problem I had with weapon poison, however, is that I used way more than I should have, because 1 dose of weapon poison lasts way more than 1 kill of Telos. It lasts for like 2 to 4 kills per dose. Even still though, I always reapply poison before nearly every kill, which inflates the amount of poison I actually need. Regardless, I used 2027 weapon poison doses at around 8k each, so 16.3 mil in total. These are so incredibly economical to use as well, and not to mention, as I said, I use way more than I should by using a dose every kill, so I can easily cut this down to a half or even a quarter of the cost. Oh well. And finally, in terms of the shared supplies, vulnerability bombs are pretty straightforward. You throw them at an enemy and they take 10% extra damage for a full minute, and you can just refresh that timer at any time. They are a bit expensive to throw, and I do have a habit of repeatedly throwing bombs at Telos even when I don't really need to. Oops. In total, I've thrown around 11.6 vulnerability bombs at 22.5k per, which is a total of 261.7 mil. And again, if I'm a bit more diligent with throwing less bombs than needed, this could be lowered, but it is harder to manage that, so why bother? But that ends the shared supplies and everything range uses in its entirety. Now for the melee specific supplies and gear, of which there actually aren't really many. Following up vuln bombs are sticky bombs. Much like bolas for range, they are used for binding golems on P4 and P5, but in this case it is even more important for melee to be able to bind golems within the range. Thankfully, these are incredibly cheap at 663 GP a throw, so these aren't too bad. In total, I've used 3.6k sticky bombs for a total of 2.4 mil used. Considering there are the difference between getting good melee kills and not, these are way more than a bargain. They're a steal in my books. A bit like Power Burst of Vitality, except these are way more valuable. Aside from that, the only other consumable are armor spikes. These are melee specific quote-unquote ammunition you can also keep in your inventory, but basically every time you get hit, even if it misses, you'll reflect damage back on your target that scales up with your smithing level. While the damage itself is a neat little bonus, its real benefit is proc even more poison hits to increase damage that way, so they're quite worth bringing for that extra bit of damage, especially as we established earlier that poison damage is incredible. Each spike is worth 68 GP per, with almost 55k spikes used in total, so I've spent around 3.7 mil in total for these spikes. Don't worry, the creation process for spikes is not painful at all. It's fine. With the gear, trim masterwork and the weapons basically mimic elite ceramic and ranged weapons there, just with much less degradation costs. The trim masterwork all cost close to 529k per percent, but that's not all there is to that. Because it's custom fit, each percent lasts double the amount of non-custom fit trim masterwork, so the costs are halved. As such, these degrade much more slowly. I use only 30.7% total charge by trim masterwork, which is only like 16.2 mil in cost. That's only like a 7th of the cost of elite ceramic. It's so incredibly cheap to use, even compared to some other 1090 armors out there. Unfortunately, we pivot away to incredibly expensive costs again. There's another pocket slot item called Erethror's Grimoire that instead increases the critical hit cap from 12k to 15k and crit chance by 12%. While this is in theory on par or even better than a Scrimshaw Cruelty, Cruelty is also much cheaper and it also works on bleeds, which Grimoire does not. There's no situation where using Grimoire over Cruelty can give you an extra kill per hour, even with Smoke Cloud, so I use Cruelty for range instead. That being said, melee has no damage boosting Scrimshaw like ranged or magic, so Grimoire gets used here instead. I started the month with full charge and ended with only 23 minutes left. You recharge the Grimoire with pages that recharge it by 25 minutes a page, and I've used 53 pages across the month. If we add in the amount of charges used before any recharging, I've effectively used 56 pages worth of charges. Each page is worth an exorbitant amount at close to 5.8 mil per page, and since GE prices can fluctuate, the final number is very much not set in stone. Still though, with 56 pages used, that's a total of 325.7 mil used in Grimoire charges alone. This is elite ceramic tier in terms of cost, while it's a little bit more justified because Melee's next best pocket slot item is a God Book, which is noticeably weaker. It's still crazy sky high, and that recent page update a few weeks ago barely did much, if at all. What a shame. Now there's a couple of final things outside of presets we need to address before we close out the entire list of supplies. First up are the incense sticks. Lanternine, Quorum, Spirit Weed Incense. These are neat little buffs you can get that provide various different effects. Lanternine increases the duration of all potions by 2 minutes, so my overload goes from 6 minutes to 8, weapon poison from 12 minutes to 14. Quorum buffs all poison damage by 10%, so all that poison synergy I mentioned earlier will be even crazier. Finally, Spirit Weed increases the amount of summoning spell points I recover both naturally and with spiritual prayers by 40%, allowing me to juice the Ripper a lot more easily. All of these have pretty interesting costs. The values I provide are actually at their highest potency level, of which there are 4, but you can instantly hit level 4 by overloading sticks, which has an upfront cost of 6 sticks for 10 minutes, then as long as you never let the boost run out, you can just use 1 stick to add 10 more minutes to the duration forever and ever and ever. So if you PVM for hours and hours on end, eventually will come to a point where you don't need to spend as much on sticks. But sometimes there will be times where I wasn't able to recover sticks right before they died, so that kinda sucked. Still though, in total, I used over 1k of each stick with Spirit Weed at 32k-ish per, Lanternine at 18.3k per, and Quorum at 38.6k per. Altogether, it cost me around 90 mil, and for the benefits, it's questionably worth it. But the extra damage on poison and better restoration on summoning spell points is always great. The only really questionable one is Lanternine sticks, since it's hard to really determine if it's worth using it to extend your overload. But speaking personally, I would love to have less reasons to spend time making overloads, even if I don't really need to worry about that. And finally, we have the aura refreshes, Viswax, and life refreshes. The life refreshes are interesting because you can buy both life refreshes and aura refreshes at War's Retreat with Marks of War. But the thing is, you can only get life refreshes from War's Retreat, while you can also buy aura refreshes from Death doing your Reaper tasks. There's technically value to buying aura refreshes via Reaper tasks, since you could use those points to buy incomplete Hydrix, but if you do a lot of PVM like I do, it is always more economical to buy aura refreshes with Reaper points. As such, you can't really put a real monetary value on auras and life refreshes, as both are effectively obtained for free. Still though, let's examine them as they're important parts of being able to streak effectively. Across the month, I signed over 69 times, so I had to use refreshers every time that happened, and for actual aura refreshes, I used 68. The great thing about aura refreshes is that every day, I can get a free refresh from my premier artifact, and on the days I transition from range to melee, I don't need to immediately refresh the first activation of Berserker, which saves 1 aura refresh then. So even though I killed Telos for a very long time, those two all add up to help cut down the amount of aura refreshes used, which is really sick. But for Viswax, we can actually calculate this. Since I extended almost every aura except for the tail end of the earlier streaks, this makes a lot of Viswax used for the month. Over 5,320 Viswax. That's quite a lot. It would be possible to self-sustain that much wax through just dailies, so you need to buy them. Each wax is worth around 11.5k per, so in total that's around 61.3 mil spent, but it's still worth spending for longer auras, so I can't really complain. Finally, there's the inevitable deaths. Being 100% perfect across the entire month is asking for a lot, and of course, there are times where I died. In total, I died 5 times, but the first death is actually kind of interesting. Now you see, if Telos dies right when you die at the same tick, or you die a little bit after, you get to continue your streak still. So that's cool. But after that, I wasn't as fortunate and I lost 4 streaks. Each death was kind of expensive, so in total I had to pay around 60 mil in death costs alone. That definitely hurts a bit, but it doesn't hurt as much as losing the loot. So losing that much in death costs, whatever. But now we established all the supplies used. In total, all these supply costs add up to around 3.2 billion. Subtracting that from the revenue, and we are down to 27.6 bill in raw profit. That's absolutely a lot of money made. In terms of time spent, we've established that every streak takes around 13 hours to complete, and I've completed 8 streaks. The earlier streaks were a bit longer, so in total, the completed streaks took 105.2 hours. But the 4 failed streaks add another 27.5 hours, so in total, I spent around 132.7 hours. Taking our final profit, that's around 208 mil per hour in profit alone, and if we ignore supply costs, that's 232.3 mil per hour, so that's 24.3 mil in supply costs alone. Ouch. As a fun fact, if we add up all the kills, I've done 2,030 kills for the entire month. On average, every kill in terms of comments is worth 5.4 mil per kill, and every kill period is worth 15.1 mil per kill. Pretty cool. Now those are the values I personally got. We can absolutely pump it up by removing all the fail streaks from the equation, but we should look at those fail streaks first before doing so. In those 4 streaks, I did manage to salvage 2 orbs and a dormant Saren Godbow from them. However, that's not the entire story since I have lost 4 orbs, 2 dormant God swords, 1 dormant Godbow, 1 dormant staff, and 1 reprisal codex. That's around 2.4 bill lost, and if I had never died and I kept those rares, my revenue would increase to at least 250 mil per hour, or 225.7 mil per hour after supply costs. Of course, there could be higher potential, but that's the bare minimum improvement. But now let's look at the revenue only via the 8 successful streaks over those 1600 kills. In total, the revenue is over at 28 bill with 105.2 hours. If I had managed to somehow do 200 kill streaks perfectly with 0 failures, I will be able to make 266.5 mil an hour, or 242.2 mil an hour after supply costs. That's a ton of money, and certainly incredibly lucrative. Unfortunately, my actual revenue falls behind 24.9% in rage claims. And considering 200 kills are mentally draining for most players, with a high risk of failure compared to claims being way easier, less stressful, and less risky, yeah, I don't know about 200 kill streaks. I didn't even bring up the risk of disconnecting or power outages, and while I was lucky enough to not have any of those problems at all, there's still yet another risk that makes these 200 kill streaks impractical, even if you have the raw talent to back it up. However, this does open up more doors in finding better ways of making money, but they all have their own caveats. The first one is starting your kill streak from a higher initial enrage, like 500% or 1000% or even 1500% or so. This obviously means you'll get a lot more rares per streak, and that will definitely help. However, that also means even higher risk, you can probably expect even more failed streaks. So while this is one way to go, it's even more stressful and difficult. The other option will be simply streak from 24.9% until you get a drop or so. This also works. In fact, a few people do this instead of just claiming instantly because the commons aren't really what you're after, it's for the rares. But the downside is that if you actually want to do a 200 kill streak, it is way more dangerous. You have to either ditch range entirely or eat it up and take the increased risk of dying if you're going to keep using range. And with both of those options, you have to consider a drop in kills per hour since you'll probably want to swap to melee, so you need to weigh if that's truly worth it or not, getting lower kills per hour but making up for it with commons and such. Of course, you can simply scale down the ambition and simply go for 2 drops in one streak, or an orb set, or whatever. That can work as well, and if you can get consistent kills, I would definitely say that beats 24.9% claims. But the skill requirement increases exponentially compared to claims, even 200 kill streaks from 0%, so in reality, 24.9% claims may remain the way to make money for 99% of people that can actually do Telos at this level. And of course, I could simply just get luckier, but that wouldn't really help in terms of actually comparing streaks and claims. If we look at the amount of rares obtained across everyone's 200 kill streak ever done, there's an average of 9 rares per streak, which is roughly a 1 out of 22 chance of getting drops per kill. Within my month, I averaged around 1 rare every 24 kills, which is slightly lower than the normal average logged on the 200 kill streak sheet. If I included lost rares, then that increases to 1 out of 21.8, which is just barely better than the average. It's hard to say whenever or not people are as a whole lucky or unlucky on that sheet, especially as there's some real unfortunate stingers there. But I did basically fall into those averages there, so it's safe to say it's as accurate as possible there. Bottom line is, 200 kill streaks from 0% may have slight potential in being better than 24.9% claims, but the amount of stress and skill required make it far more impractical to make money compared to claims. There may be alternate ways to streak and still beat claims, but they require even more skill and risk compared to even these streaks from 0%. I can't in good conscience recommend doing these 200 kill streaks as a moneymaker. Only do it for prestige and personal achievement. The money is only a bonus. That covers all of 200 Killstreak month. I was hoping to get this video out earlier, but trying to find the right words to convey the information and all proved to be a little bit difficult. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the breakdown and learned something new about top tier money making. If you enjoyed, drop a like and comment and share the video. Maybe even subscribe. All that helps out the channel big time. Until next time everybody, bye.